Myself, Mahesh, and I work as a cloud solution architect with Microsoft. And I'm with Microsoft for 7 years and close to 17 years in the industry. And I'm certified application developer in Kubernetes and Linux, so and so. And without any further ado, and I'll start the session with the introduction about topic, what you're going to say. It's about what are the must-know topics or maybe the best practices in AKS to achieve the better resiliency, right? Uh, so the session takeaway would be on three areas, like what are the best practices you should be aware of when you are working with clusters in a productions, and also what are the day-to challenges you'll be seeing in scenarios like production. Day one challenges are easy because you deploy a plain vanilla microservices into the production, but day two challenges are slightly complicated, because when you more and more workload, if you try to move, and also when the customer started using the deployed Kubernetes cluster, you will get into the day two challenges. That's what I mentioned as a day two. And you should be aware of what are the upcoming features, SLAs, node pools, availability zones, and all of the thing. And with that, let me go to the Kubernetes maturity model. This is not something from Microsoft or anybody here. It is actually a general opinion from the company that you say these Kubernetes maturity models into 7 phases. As a beginner of Kubernetes, you will be into 1 to 4, right? Either in a prepare, transform, or deploy or confidence. But the topic today, what we are discussing, is specifically applies from phase 5, 6, and 7, right? It means that how to improve your operations, how to measure and control, how to optimize, or how to get maximum return of investment from your existing cluster, right? So the phase 1 to need not have any introduction. If you look at it, it is all about how you can prepare or evangelize about Kubernetes inside your organization to get convinced about going for a Kubernetes. And then third phase is deploying a hello world or maybe a simple application from your company deploying to the Kubernetes. And fourth phase, you see the CTO, CXOs agreeing that more and more customers are open to or move to Kubernetes workload. And then you will see problems like sometimes you see the timeout from the DNS, maybe the cluster is not responding. All these things challenges would come in because the Kubernetes cluster itself so massive. There are so many moving components within this Kubernetes, so it is so difficult if you're not able to take care of this. But I encourage this, take this Kubernetes maturity model. There is a URL in the bottom, right? It comes from CNCF, and there's a third party who has blogged about it. I love this analogy of moving from phase 1 to phase 7. But in this topic, we're going to see specifically about phase 5 onwards. So I have a very strict timeline to cover here, and let's see. Let's run through one by one. Quick check if everything is going good. Can somebody put a
Yes, everything is
message
fine.
in the? Okay, cool. So the first thing is multi-tenancy. I mean, in general, so best practices, there is no limit for best practices, right? If you are doing something with EKS, GKE, AKS, I mean, these best practices goes on and on. You can actually author a book about it. But in 30 minutes, I thought, like, let me understand what the customers are facing through and what is relevant for the customers today, and then summarize it here neatly so that you will get maximum out of it. The first one is the multi-tenancy. As you see that namespace is a logical isolation boundary. You not have an introduction. There are always recommend to have a multiple namespaces, one for a prod, a UAT production, and also even for the customer also, you can try to have multiple namespaces so that without jumping into the other namespace or kind of a violation. So if you are still not convinced with the namespace level hierarchies or isolation, then consider about the private cluster in AKS. Private cluster would give you the complete capsule of holding the end-to-end within the single cluster kind of thing. So you are not actually running multiple customers into the same cluster. And then scheduling. Despite we see the lot of documentation prescription about you should use the quotas in a better way, and also pod distributions properties, or maybe the node affinities, chains and tolerations and node selectors. But it's disappointing to see that customers are still just start with the hello world and then start replacing the hello world application with their images, what they are trying to bring in. They'll continue to go to the production, but they never come back and then adjust all these requirements. So I would say consider the advanced features or maybe schedulers like anti-affinity and also pod affinity in a greater way. The reason is that if you are running a Redis cache pod within the application front end, and you always want to have a pod affinity, but you do not want to have a something else with the front end, right? So all these things can be controlled with anti-affinity. And networking, of course, you can use the network policies. Netpol is the better place, and also you can control the in and out of the traffic. Authorization, RBAC, AAD stuff, which need not have any introduction. If you are a beginner, then I'm sure that you will be uh, using the custom authentication and then slowly get into the AAD kind of stuff. Last one is about container policy. I think we'll see all this thing in a coming slide. Uh, Enforce the resource quota. This is a very must thing when you are running an application in production. You must have this quota set. Otherwise, we have seen customers saying that there is a timeout issues frequently. It's sporadic issues when there is not able to reproduce the issue. And it's a lot of to and fro, but we always recommend to have this resource quota, whether it's a small development or maybe a small UAT or a customer demo. This has to come as a practice. So try to have this resource quota always set so that you will not get into the problem of limiting going to the part loop, kind of a crashing and other thing. And the second one is the part distribution budgets. And of course, we should have this part distribution budget when you have a 40 plus nodes cluster or maybe 15 nodes cluster. When there is a frequent updates or a cluster upgrade, when you do, you should always have the maximum available and minimum available and maximum unavailable. There are 3 or 4 parameters around that in PDBs. So play very smartly there and then make sure that minimum maximum available parts can serve the existing customers. So don't worry, all these things will be shared as a slide, and this all these are documented in the Microsoft AKs also. But I'm trying to give everything in a crisp of 30 minutes and see. The fourth one is about the node affinity, and node affinity, as discussed, you want to specifically pin certain workload in a certain nodes, then node affinity comes in play. Let's say you have the Kubeflow kind of a workload and maybe the N series requirements or the GPU requirements where you need to uh, push those containers to a specific nodes, then you have to use this node affinity. Then it will actually make sure that those workloads are properly pinned to that particular nodes. And yeah, this is one of the best practices we see customers are not rigorously following it. Fifth one, I think Cube Advisor. I'll show you the Cube Advisor sometime towards the end if you have time. This is a nice tool. Actually, you can run this tool and then it will tell you what is missing in your cluster, right? We had seen a customer having 45 plus nodes, and he was also surprised to see some of those mistakes. It goes to the production and then it was living there for almost 6 months. But when you run this Cube Advisor kind of a tool, it will tell you what you are missing in your production cluster. And yeah, we regularly run this latest version of open source and detect issues. Yeah, of course, I mean, the Cube Advisor, they keep enhancing it. So once in a while, maybe twice a month, you try to run this and then see if there is any gap. This is how the sample Cube Advisor output looks like. And it will tell you it's actually, by the way, it's a console application and it's available in GitHub. And I ran it for one of my cluster which I prepared for this demo. So you can see that there is a resource limits missing, memory limits missing. It goes on and on. It also tells you how to remediate or maybe take action on closing this gap. It actually points to the Kubernetes document is where you can refer it and then set those limits. And sixth one, we see the Uptime SLA. I think there are some question in the chat window. I'll take all those questions towards the end. Otherwise, you can connect with me in the Twitter or email ID. Uptime SLA, and as you know that the Kubernetes or AKS, we don't provide SLA for the master nodes, right? We provide the SLA only for the agent nodes or worker nodes. So, but in case of your customers or financial customers where they want to have end-to-end SLA, then don't shy away taking this Uptime SLA, which is actually worth taking it because it just comes around $70, but it still guarantees that you have a better SLA than going without SLA if you have a very stringent SLA from your end customer. I'm surprised to see that many customers are not aware of this because it's been lately introduced in AKS. So if you go to the Azure pricing calculator, you will see that uptime SLA as a separate checkbox. Per cluster it is comes with certain amount. So just enable that so that you will get it covered for SLA point of view. And if you are deploying the AKS cluster across the availability zone, it is 99.95, and it's better than 99.9. Reason is it is 44 minutes versus 22 minutes or 20 minutes, right? So I would always go for this deploying across availability zones. When you are creating a cluster and say deploy, it will ask you whether you want to deploy across the availability zones or you want to strictly put into the same region. So uh, leverage the availability zones to avoid or maybe insulate failures if there is any zone level failures, right? By the way, the master nodes are the master node, which is the control plane, is already having the deployed in a fault tolerant way. So you may not worry about or anything about this master way and master nodes. So all you have to take care of your worker nodes or agent nodes. Um, I think this is what we discussed. And then how to create availability zones from the command shell, just say dash zones 1 to 3. And if you want to deploy it across the two zones, and you can also specify zone 1 and 2. And this is how it's been split between zones. So some of the customers actually who has already started this long time back, they're stuck in single region, let's say in central India. Unfortunately, last year we had some failure due to the power issues in the central India, and they are all stuck in the same region. They could not able to move anything out. So all this thing can be avoided by mitigate the risk by splitting into multiple zones. You can see that in the screenshot. I ran it by Southeast Asia, a single node pool, which has been three machines has been split into three different zones, right? 1, 2, and 3. And I see there is a question about if time permits, can you also speak about multiple schedulers and the daemon sets best practices? I would encourage to check the document. If there is no detail about that, please reach out to me, but I'm sure that there will be a detailed description about that. Let's proceed. Then another one, 8 point is that we always recommend to have more than one node pool, right? There are some customers who started as an early bird with the Kubernetes. They all stuck with the single node pool, or maybe before this virtual machine scale set, there was no node pool concept. They were all deploying as it is with 30 nodes, 40 nodes. But after seeing this node pool benefits, they are trying to convert everything into the VM scale set based cluster. The advantage of the node pool based cluster is that you can actually segment or bucket into multiple customer size. Let's say the customer premier customers, right? For the premier customers, you can say high-end virtual machines with high memory in a different node pool, because each of those VMs within the node pool should be an identical type, right? In another node pool, you can actually have a lesser VM size or maybe type with a different GPU combination and all other thing. So that by having a different node pools, you guarantee that if anything goes in one node pool, also you can try to avoid everything goes down kind of scenarios, right? You can define as much as maybe 5 node pools, 6 node pools, and within namespace isolation, again within node pool isolation, you'll have a better granular controller to switch if there is anything goes wrong. Have one more node pool taking the customer workload. There is a question about is AKS support Azure scale set. Of course, the AKS now VM scale set is what we call. It is now underneath the AKS. The VM scale set has been used to manage this node pool. How about the DR scenarios in AKS? I think there is a detailed documentation about the DR and how you can actually back up your cluster. Vijay, please check that documentation. And I think that's all about this node pool. In the screenshot, there is a couple of node pool. There is an agent node pool that comes by default. All the core Kubernetes concepts, or maybe the some of those agents and other things, core components will lie on that agent pool. But the my node pool is what the worker node pool. You can actually bring down to zero also this my node pool. I will talk about the starting and stopping also sometime later now. And Azure policy, this is one thing which is not taken very seriously or considered very lightly. But trust me, there are companies, kind of publishers, kind of companies where I work with, where they're completely mandate the Azure policy as they must think to proceed, right? This brings a very strict compliance or maybe the stringent best practices in deploying any workload on the Kubernetes, right? Um, and there is a no limit for this policy. I can also author a custom policies using the ORM templates. A sample policy is that when you are deploying a cluster, when you are deploying the containers to the AKS cluster, uh, we are mandating that or telling that it must have the resource quota limit set, or maybe the key vault, or maybe the having the multiple, maybe the, I mean, two replicas, kind of all this kind of a policies can be enforced, and so that the governance would kick in from the day one onwards, so that without by mistake also, without, I mean, by mistake also, your DevOps guy or new guy who is in the team will not get into any trouble. So already there are 10 plus policies already authored for you, mostly used policy kind of thing. But the last one is like, custom policy is something which I feel that, you can write it in your ORM template kind of a style and then apply that so that, it works brilliantly and take care of all those compliance demands. Autoscaler, I think, at least in the case, I see the HPA and Autoscaler has been documented and been used. I haven't seen the VPA inside AKS. I don't know. I think I'm not sure whether VPA has not been considered or it's still yet to come. But I see the good samples and explanation about, you have to use the HPA and cluster Autoscaler approach simultaneously. It's not very kind of a rocket science. Just go and enable this Autoscaler as in the command line or in the portal also. You can just go and just tick mark, so that automatically tell you what is the minimum node and maximum node you want to have it, and then what are the parameters to look for auto scaling. These are like overlooked properties or small things which I surprised to see missed in the productions workload, which I wanted to share it here. And then seventh point, which I want to say, this is a brilliant feature I see recently discovered. It's still in preview. Earlier, I used to go and manually stop all those VMs, right? But now in the console, just look at the sixth line and seventh line. Just in one line, if everything is set from 1 to 5, that's a one-time activity. I could just go and trigger a stop command. It will actually go and shut down the complete VMs so that all the state will be preserved at least for 12 months, right? This is a brilliant, not only for a development, this helps for the companies who want to show the demos to the end customer. At the end of the demo, they want to shut everything and keep it as it is, and then resume it when you want to showcase the same demo to the end another customer, right? Earlier, I had a lot of issues going through individual VMs, stopping individual VMs, but all those things can be taken care by just shutting the complete cluster by stop command and then start command. And by the way, this supports only with the VM scale set, because these command actually go and affect the VM scale set more port. So try to consider this as well. Even in case if you are using for a development purpose, maybe one node, two node cluster, at the end of the weekend, during the weekend, you want to shut it off. You can also automate this with the logic apps. There is no end for it as long as there's a console CLI is available here. There is a question comes from, okay, even stopped cluster charged. No, the stopped cluster will not be charged. Only the charge for the master nodes will be considered. So there is a question from Sunil. Is start stop available for private cluster? Of course, yeah. 12th one is a capacity planning, which I surprised to see when I work with multiple customers who are preparing for RFPs, request for proposals, or maybe they are quoting tenders. They do not know how to how to size the node, right? All they have is their SaaS application, or maybe the VM kind of a VM deployed application. When we ask, how many customers are going to use this application, they might say 20,000 people are expected. Or if it is a public service companies like, the central government projects, we do not know how many people are going to use that use this application when it goes live, right? Because it's kind of a B2C kind of thing. When it's open to the public, It is so difficult, but at least you should know that uh, how many parts can go into the node and how big is your part, what is the memory requirement for this part. So there is a link in the bottom. Actually, it will tell you how to size your AKS cluster, right? How many nodes you want and how many subnet you have to have it within the nodes. And I mean, the reason all this thing, these small things will affect you in the long run, right? If you're not looking at, if you're not sizing it properly, we had a kind of, the subnet exhaustion. We had it in one place where they have to completely redeploy a new cluster, right? You have to plan it all the things, in ahead of time so that you will avoid last minute surprises when you move the production workload. Okay, and 13th point is about to use diagnostics. And I wanted to show this beautiful thing, which they already incorporated in the portal. If you are using AKS today, just go to the AKS cluster, and then the left side you would see diagnose and solve problems. It's kind of a robot kind of thing where you go and click next, next. It will tell you, it will pull certain things and look at the certain signals and say if everything is green or if something is red, it will tell you upfront. Let's say if you are running if there is any out of memory exceptions, there is a pod actually going in a crash loop, you want to quickly do a quick check on that, just go and say, just run this and then see, what is the result out of that. If everything is green, nothing to worry. So in fact, the networking is what I like it. It's very complicated in Kubernetes world, and it tells you that just run it, and then if there is any issues, kind of subnet exhaustions, or maybe there is issue in the DNS, health of your core DNS, all these things can be automated way of, just run the scripts and then let you know in the Azure portal itself. There is a question, is it possible to create a private DNS zone using Terraform? I haven't created, but Terraform is the first class citizen now supporting the Kubernetes, in fact, across the Azure, AKS. Um, Going forward, you will find Azure ARM and also Terraform side by side supporting multiple workloads. Please share the capacity planning, John. Definitely, I'll share the complete slide because it has got some of those hyperlinks embedded. Fourth one, Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor will not be charged for you, so but still it actually goes and look across all your workloads. It could be a Kubernetes service or app services, virtual machines. What I'm interested is Kubernetes services. It is showing that some of the things are missed. Let's say there are two Kubernetes services running here. Azure Advisor is telling that the PDBs are missing, and also there is unsupported Kubernetes version is detected. And this all helps you when you have more than 10, 15 clusters, with each cluster is having 60, 70 nodes. And trust me, I've seen these customers getting benefited out of this by running this in a Azure Advisor. If you have a small cluster, then doesn't it's not a problem. But when it goes beyond certain limits, then you need some tools to every day the DevOps comes and look at these kind of tools to get an idea what's happening, what actually happening in the cluster and health of the cluster to proceed next. And the next tool called Azure Periscope. And Azure Periscope is a free open source tool. And assume that you have a 40 plus node cluster deployed in Chennai region, and there are some sudden issues. The cluster is not responding due to some underlying issue in your application, which is taking 100% CPU or 100% disk, and which is actually completely hampered your application to go down. And when you raise the ticket with support, the support team will ask you to retain the cluster to collect the logs, right? But unfortunately, you cannot retain this 40 node cluster for a long time till you do this investigation or troubleshooting. So Azure Periscope is a fantastic tool. Just run this tool, point into Azure Blob Storage. It collects the required logs and then dump it to the centralized place so that you can actually release the cluster or delete the cluster, make a room for the next cluster creation, right? So if you are trying to incorporate a proper DevOps, maybe SRE kind of a practice, I would recommend as like Azure Advisor. Azure Periscope is also another tool. Many people are not aware of it. So all it does is simply collect all the logs and then put it to the Azure Blob Storage. So when you file a ticket with support, you can tell that, hey, this is the Blob Storage account, or maybe the SaaS key. Please go and download the logs for your investigation. So this will help you to just just proceed, move on with the new cluster creation if there is something goes wrong completely. And then 16th point is something like a production checklist. Maybe these are some of the things I keep learning even now. Thanks to some of my colleagues in Microsoft, I spoke to Yusuf and Sumit Kute, Saurabh Bhartav. I mean, all these people are like Kubernetes experts in Microsoft India region, and we see these are like collective knowledge we keep sharing internally, and all these points, 16 points I've collected so far, all based on the customer experience documentation plus field experience. The 16th point is something which really I see something is not documented in documentation. If you look at the regions, right? If you deploy to a particular region, let's say in central India, you cannot move to a different region, right? I've seen customers moving a production workload for cheaper region, and then suddenly due to compliance or ISO audit, they want to move completely to a different region to get it to compliant, 100% compliant, right? So these are small things which you have to keep in mind, right? Regions are very pinned to a specific thing. I mean, you cannot move Kubernetes cluster as it is to a different region as like any other resources. And then version, definitely you can move to a different version. I mean, upgrade. And then sixth point, I think of third and fourth point, as you know, we already discussed about Azure zones and availability. I mean, other thing. Services. The fourth point is something like we have seen multiple places the ingress controller Nginx has been used, but I see the traffic as also used for the traffic is one more open source. I see but I mean these are small things. We have to thoroughly do a POC and see what is the limitation with the ingress or what is the limitation or support by going with the open source tools like a traffic, so that avoid the last minute surprise. And then fifth one, and select the appropriate VM type, right? This is very, very important thing. So once you select the region and select the VM type, you are stuck with that. There's no way you can actually do a vertical auto scaling or change the VM SKUs or anything like that. Only option is to create a separate node pool with a different VM size. It's all actually adds your a lot of operation timing and a lot of ifs and buts and surprises. So select the proper VM type before you dive into the production, and then get go from there. I think sixth point we talked about in length, like sizing and enforcing the quota limits and everything. And the seventh point, in general, we recommend Azure CNI. You can actually see that the documentation has Azure CNI versus Kubernetes. By default, you will see Kubernetes has been deployed, but if you see some limitations, then you can go with Azure CNI. And I put in something specifically in bracket. A Kubernetes, go for a Kubernetes unless your organization has a restriction on IP address to be assigned to the subnet. Otherwise, Azure CNI is the first class, and I would say go with Azure CNI, and you will be support-wise, troubleshooting-wise, everything is covered end-to-end, right? And eighth one is something, a new feature I see. Security is also a hot topic these days, and you want to restrict the kubectl command access to your, or maybe the API server access by whitelisting certain IP ranges, right? Let's say you and your colleague is going to quite often going to manipulate these API servers through command cell. So you can whitelist your IP and plus your colleague's IP, and then from there, so no one can actually kind of access those IP outside of those whitelisted thing. When you say API server access, it's just your kubectl access, right? And then storage and databases. I think storage itself a big topic. Actually, we had a multiple Excel sheet within Microsoft. We see what to use, what not to use, the stateful set. Inside the stateful again, multiple things. So I want to just keep it simple. Always go with the third party, whoever the cloud provider is there, and go with their first native solution or cloud native solution, so that you will be support wise covered end to end, right? If you are fairly matured, if you are matured well enough, then you can do a lot of experiments with a lot of open sources. But otherwise, go with the default managed services or a PaaS services as much as possible from the support wise, and also the easy networking and bringing the data in and out quickly. And the ninth one, monitoring. And that is an interesting story in monitoring aspects. I can take a couple of minutes here because I want to stress the importance of monitoring. But by the way, the over monitoring also cost you a lot. I have seen a customer paying 10 lakhs, 12 lakhs just for somebody enabled all the checkboxes in the Azure Diagnostics and then end up like paying 12 lakhs. And don't overlog or over monitor. and because it's all cost at the end of the day. Mm. And also, I see there is a session from Mamta today about Prometheus as the tool. You can use Azure Monitor or FileBeat or Prometheus also as a tool to monitor. Uh, I'll take a minute to explain the importance of monitor. This happens to one of our customers in AKS December, November timeframe, November end. We had this issue. The complaint was, they called me and we called all our solution architects, and they said there is a customer of them complaining that there is a timeout when they try to log into the application, right? And it seems like a application timeout issue for customer, but fault is on AKS, right? They are pointing AKS as the unreliable or not able to find out the problem with the AKS. It's actually, by the way, it's a sporadic issue. There is no way to replicate this issue consistently. So we had a multiple calls with the customer, end customer. Once in a while, the end customer was facing that, when they try to log in that www.contoso.com/login, they face that, frequent login failure, or maybe the application timeout or page cancelled, action cancelled, all these things. And then first day of troubleshooting, we come to know that it was actually core DNS was failing. And then everybody started blaming that, hey, there is a core DNS issue. Core DNS is not reliable. AKS is actually having some problem with the core DNS and all this thing going around. Second day, when we progressed and when we moved on by enabling certain monitors, we saw that the underlying disk which they used for the nodes was, P10 disk. P10 is the capacity disk, which is actually 500 IOPS per second, and that is the default disk you will get it. And then, so what has happened once in a while, and they see that the throttling has gone beyond the 500 IOPS. It has reached sometimes 1000 IOPS. Due to this IOPS choking or a starvation, we are facing cube DNS issue, but I'm sorry, core DNS issue. So you will find very erratic behavior, right? You will find that login page cancelled, or sometimes you will see the report was taking time to prepare or slow down. I mean, it could be anything because your underlying disk is starving with IOPS. So all these things can be monitored only through better monitoring, in pipeline, how is functioned as a cluster. That's what I keep saying, that when you have 40 plus or 50 plus nodes, it is so difficult to keep an eye on all these parameters. So we should have a very concise monitoring in a better way to avoid such IO starvations or network starvation, so that you can better recover quickly. 10th one, there's a node restarts. In fact, the node restart is also it's been getting automated slowly. I see there is a checkbox coming that in AKS when you say automatically upgrade when there is a new version. So it's a kind of autopilot. I'm giving complete control to AKS that if there is any OS patching has been done. So what will happen now? It will add another couple of nodes, or maybe minimum one node, but it will depends on the cluster size. It will add the reserve node, so that it will restart the nodes after patching, so that it's complete automation kind of thing. So the reason I'm stressing this 10th point, I had seen customer not rebooting even after 6 months, 7 months, right? So that is all surprising. So these rebootings also have to be there, which we cannot, Kubernetes, AKS cannot enforce to reboot it, right? So, but right now it is actually getting kind of a preview mode where just check it. We are giving the autopilot control to AKS to take care of this rebooting also. And otherwise, you have to use this cured KURED for automating the node reboots. That is what I have, and there are 16 points which I covered. And it's, by the way, this applicable to any cloud today, right? Any EKS, GKE also, right? So you learn and then align your company goal or strategy towards the workload. And the reason I'm mentioning as a baseline cluster, I'll come to that. I'll show you the baseline cluster or maybe a sample cluster, how it should look like, right? And then start operating with that, and then best practices, revisit the best practices. There is no end for these best practices. Attend KubeCon kind of a conferences, and then you can borrow all these best practices from Kubernetes to the AKS also. And then iteratively, work on this, work as a team, and then keep sharing your knowledge with your teams also, so that you avoid last minute surprises. And these are some of the links which I see that if you have a Kubernetes AKS in production today, you should be aware of what has been released, what is there in the release notes, what is currently previewed. Don't use the preview features for your production, but it's good to start piloting, in your UAT, or maybe not UAT, maybe pre-staging or development mode. And we saw Ronak was talking about KEDA. KEDA was in preview for a long time, and it's been GA, and it's also accepted as a CNCF. So it's those kind of a project, you should not miss it, right? You should actually start piloting when the project has been kicked as open source from some of the brand names, and then see that whether it's really helping your problem, and then start accepting as a production thing. And there is a public roadmap. If you see anything is missing in Kubernetes today, in AKS today, you will see that definitely in the roadmap, whether it has been prioritized in the next release somewhere in the May or April timeframe. And then you can also request any of the features missing in the AKS. There is a link to raise the request, and there are some known issues, right? Of course, known issues are like documented. If there's a set of customers who are using Kubernetes also facing some issues, which is actively getting investigated. All this thing has been captured in the known issues. In case, let's say the CSI, we have something, container storage interfaces using the key vault and other thing. Those are new things coming up, and the CSI has been adopted recently, and it has gone GA some places. So if you are surprised by some issues, then always check in the known issues. And then public FAQ, always any documentation you read, at least in Azure side, always read it from Microsoft documentation, because it's a living document. It's getting monitored or updated frequently by the Microsoft folks or community folks by getting the PR link to the GitHub. And I mean, if you don't find it useful or maybe complicated with the Microsoft documentation, then go to the third-party documentation. Because the third-party documentation, there is no guarantee that whether it's getting updated, what has happened after 6 months, nobody knows that, right? But these I mean, the Kubernetes itself, it's a lot of moving parts and a lot of innovation happening in a very agile, in a very quick manner. So I would recommend always check in Microsoft documentation as the single source of truth. And the last one, www.akschecklist.com. Right away, you can check this akschecklist.com as the fantastic place. If somebody is complaining about AKS or maybe frequently facing some issues, I'm sure that this would apply for other cloud also. But AKS checklist as a comprehensive list of all the checklist items can be considered for your Kubernetes cluster. That's all I have, and I will share the slide deck. And I had a plan to have some demos, but I thought like if it's 17, 16 points, it's so difficult to run each of this command and show some demos. And hope you found it useful. You can also drop an email if there is something missed out, or if you want to hear more about it. And Twitter handle is there if you want to quickly get those slides. I'll put it in my GitHub repo and share the slides. Thank you so much. I'll begin.